Hello everybody, my name is Zach with Overrated Gamers. Today we're going to be doing a deck tech on Slivers. Slivers have 4 different legends to choose from, and I will get into explaining why I chose Sliver Overlord as my commander. He is one of every color for a 7/7. Pay 3 mana, search your library for a Sliver and put it in your hand, and pay 3 mana, gain control of target Sliver. I run him because for 3 mana you can tutor any Sliver, so he gives you consistency, and he can gain control of opponent Slivers. At one point I was running Amoeboid Changeling, which turned any creature into another creature, so I could tap the Amoeboid Changeling and take control of anything. While it was fun, it wasn't necessarily good. Amoeboid Changeling on its own doesn't really do much. But if another Sliver deck is at the table, you can take it. The other Sliver legendaries, I do run them in the deck, but they are not commanders. First one is Sliver Queen. She is one of every color for a 7/7. You can pay 2 mana to make a 1/1 Sliver creature with her. Now I could have easily run her as the commander. She does make Slivers, which benefit from all the stat buffs of any other Slivers, or if they gain flag, poison, etc. But she doesn't give me the consistency of the Overlord. She is, however, in the deck. Next up we do have Sliver Legion. They give my Slivers +1/+1 for each other Sliver in play. While it's nice to be able to make all of your Slivers really large, this one I consider a little worse as a commander than the other two. It doesn't give me consistency like the Overlord, and it doesn't allow me to produce more Slivers like the Sliver Queen. On its own, it does less than the first two. It's just a 7/7 for 5, and it does need other Slivers to be relevant. It's still good, it's still run, but I personally don't run it as the commander because it just makes them large. And the last one is Sliver Hive Lord. I would highly recommend never running this one as a commander. While it's nice to give your Slivers indestructible, he has a lot of downsides compared to the other 3. The first one being he's only a 5/5 compared to the other 3. He's smaller. He also, giving indestructible, doesn't get around things like Toxic Deluge, Cyclonic Rift, Path to Exile, Swords to Plowshares, things like Merciless Eviction, Final Judgment. There are tons of board wipes in the format that will just kill all of your Slivers. And on his own, he's just a 5/5 for 5. So all those factors determine that I would never suggest running him as a Sliver commander. He is, however, pretty good in the deck. It's nice to have something that does give them indestructible, but it's not good enough to run as the commander. So that's the commanders. As always, we'll start off with the mana base. I run 1 of each basic land. I run 5 fetch lands. I only run 5 fetch lands. I feel that any more than that and it starts to get too much. You have to obviously cover up land slots with those lands. If people have things that keep you from tutoring, well, it decreases your ability to tutor. We run 1 of every shock land. I have replaced 2 of my shocks recently. I recently picked up a Badlands and a Savannah. You don't have to run those. I would, however, suggest running shock lands. I run 8 filter lands. That's personal preference. We have City of Brass. Taps for any color. Mana Confluence also taps for any color. Now I have already done an in-depth review of a lot of the cards in this deck. A lot of these cards are the same cards that are in my regular 5-color decks. I only change about 30 to 37 cards between decks. That is why I'm blasting through these ones pretty quickly. If they have different relevance with the Slivers, I will bring that up. I will also put a link to the first video in the description. My first 5-color video. We have Urborg, makes all land swamps in addition to their other types. Gemstone Caverns, if it's in your hand, you can exile a non-land card. Or you can exile a card in your hand, start the game with it in play if you're not going first, comes in with a luck counter. Taps for colorless if it didn't have a luck counter, taps for any color if it did. Ancient Tune taps for 2 and deals 2 to you. Homeward Path is a bit more relevant in this deck than it was in the Super Friends deck. If someone does manage to take control of one of my slivers, or multiple slivers, I can tap the Homeward Path, regain control of them. High Market will allow me to sacrifice the slivers if someone is either trying to take control of them, if they're trying to exile them. I do run things like Pulmonic Sliver, which if they would die I can put them on top of my library instead. Bojuka Bog, it's still relevant to exile your opponent's graveyards if they have reanimate effects, if they're going to try to get something really powerful back to their hand. Cavern of Souls, this land was not in the original one. In the Slivers build I do run actually 40 lands. I have Cavern of Souls. When it comes into play, you choose a creature type. Normally it makes colorless mana, but you can tap it to add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool. If you use it, you can only use it to play the creature type you mentioned, but when you use it on, say, a sliver, that sliver can't be countered. So I can use this, play my Sliver Overlord, and my opponent can't counter it. We have Sliver Hive. It produces colorless mana. It adds 1 mana of any color to your mana pool if you're playing a Sliver spell. And you could pay 5 and tap it to create a 1/1 colorless Sliver creature token. You can only activate it though if you control another Sliver. This is nice for the later game. It spawns out some more Slivers. If you just need a few to get through, you need some of those ETB effects. Or if you just need any color to play a Sliver. We have Deathrite Shaman. He exiles a land card from a graveyard when you tap him to add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool. You can pay a black and tap it, exile an instant or sorcery card from a graveyard, each opponent loses 2 life. Pay a green and tap it, exile a creature card from a graveyard, you gain 2 life. He's mostly just in there for the first ability. I have about 5 fetches. A lot of other players oftentimes run fetches. Or even at the very worst, a lot of players might run things like Evolving Wilds, so you'll always have a land to exile. Mox Diamond, if it's on your opener, you can discard, not if it's in your opener, it's, you can discard a land when it comes into play, otherwise you have to sacrifice it. It does tap for 1 mana of any color, but yeah. Chrome Mox, for this one you do have to exile a non-land, non-artifact card when it comes into play. It's also 0 mana. Taps for any color of the card that you exiled. Sol Ring, tap for 2, costs 1. Mana Vault, it's 1 mana, tap it for 3 colorless. You can pay 4 to untap it during your upkeep. If you don't, it does 1 damage to you, and this card never untaps as normal. Birds of Paradise, 1 green flying, tap it to add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool. Exploration, it's 1 green, you can play an additional land on each of your turns. Farseek, searches your library for a plains, island, swamp, or mountain, puts it into play tapped. You can get shock lands or any of the basic lands, just can't get a basic forest. Rampant Growth. Nature's Lore, it gets a forest. The forest does come into play untapped. Chromatic Lantern, your lands tap for any color. It taps for any color. It's 3 colorless mana to play. Crop Rotation, it's 1 green. When you play it, you sack a land. Search your library for land and put it into play, then shuffle your library. In this deck it has a little more use than in the Super Friends deck. Yes, you can get Bojuka Bog, to stop a deck from doing Grave Recursion or a Mikaeus combo, but it can also function to get your Cavern of Souls or your land that taps to produce 1/1 slivers. It can get a Homeward Path to get your slivers back if they've been stolen, or a High Market to sacrifice one of your slivers if it's about to be exiled. Worldly Tutor, search your library for a creature card, reveal it, put it on top. Usually this is getting slivers. You put it on there at the end of the last opponent's turn, and at the start of your turn you'll draw it. Vampiric Tutor, it's the same thing as Worldly Tutor, except it's 1 black and you use 2 life, and it gets any card on top of your library. Instant Speed Tutors are very nice. It is worth noting that I do run a card called Quick Sliver in this deck that lets you play slivers as though they had flash, and it has flash. So if you have a Heuristic Study out in response to the trigger, you could Vampiric Tutor, get something like Quick Sliver, flash that in at end of turn, and then start flashing into other slivers at the end of turn. We have Demonic Tutor. It's 1 and a black. It searches your library for any card, puts it into your hand. We have Evolutionary Leap. 1 and a green. Pay a green, sacrifice a creature, reveal cards from the top of your library. Until you reveal a creature, put that card into your hand, and the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. Evolutionary Leap has a couple of uses, and it does have 1 or 2 advantages over Survival of the Fittest. The biggest one being that you can, rather than searching, it's just revealing, so if there's a card like Stranglehold out, you can still use this card. It also gets rid of cards that are being targeted by an opponent's ability, so if an opponent board wipes, in response you can kill your creatures and get more creatures to your hand. It also allows you to set up if you're going to cast a Living Death, so you can sacrifice all your slivers on the board, get more slivers, Living Death, then play the other slivers that you got. I'll explain Living Death in a little bit, but it basically resurrects all of your dead creatures and kills all the creatures that are currently on the board. We have Eladamri's Call. 1 in a green, instant. Search your library for a creature, reveal it, and put it into your hand. It's just another creature tutor, and it's instant speed at that. We have Court of Calling. X and 3 green, Convoke. You can tap creatures to reduce the cost of this spell by 1. Or if you have a green creature, you can pay for the green in the mana cost on it. It searches for a creature with converted mana cost X or less and puts it straight into play. So you can get out Sliver Legion in response to combat. You can get out Heart Sliver, which grants haste. You can there's a Sliver in this deck that has Shroud, so if an opponent's going to try to Path to Exile in response, you can bring out your Sliver with Shroud, prevents that from happening. Mystic Remora, it's 1 blue, enchantment, cumulative upkeep, meaning every turn you have to pay 1, and then you have to pay 1 more on top of it, so first turn 1, then 2, then 3, and so on, otherwise it dies. Whenever an opponent plays a non-creature spell, you can draw a card unless that player plays 4. It's just a strong draw engine. At the very worst it slows your opponents down. In this deck I tend not to leave it out as often as in some of my other decks. In Super Friends, I might leave this out till turn 4. In Slivers, sometimes it only stays out for 1 to 2 turns. We have Sylvan Library. 1 in a green. Beginning of your draw step, or at your draw step, you can draw 2 additional cards. If you do, put up to 2 cards you drew back on top of your library that you drew this turn. If you don't, you take 4 for each. At the very worst, it acts as a free Sensei's Divining Top every turn. In the Slivers deck, I do tend to get a little bit aggressive with it at times. Sometimes just taking the 8 for a couple of turns in a row to bring out more Slivers. We do have Slivers that gain life back in this deck. Alright, we have Heuristic Study. It's 2 in a blue, enchantment. Whenever an opponent plays a spell, you may draw a card unless that player pays 1. It's just another drawing card. We have Vandalplast, red, destroy an artifact you don't control, 4 in a red, destroy each artifact you don't control. Cyclonic Rift, 1 in a blue, return target non-land permanent you don't control to its owner's hand. 6 in a blue, return each non-land permanent you don't control to its owner's hand, and it's an instant. We have Toxic Deluge, 2 in a black. As an additional cost, pay X life. All creatures get -X until end of turn. In Slivers, this card can oftentimes kill all your Slivers. Occasionally that's what you want if you have a few that are dead and there's a living death in your graveyard. So it can help you set that up. If your Slivers are big enough, well, it can kill your opponent's small creatures. Swords to Plowshares, exile a creature. Its controller gains life equal to its power. Path to Exile, exile a creature. Its controller can search for a basic land, put it into play tapped. Beast Within, destroy a permanent. It's 2 in a green instant. Their controller gets a 3/3 green beast. Krosan Grip, split second, meaning players can't play spells or activate abilities unless they're mana abilities while this is on the stack. It's 2 in a green instant, destroys an artifact or enchantment. Now we get into the utility cards. We have Training Grounds. It's 1 blue. Activated abilities of creatures you control cost up to 2 less to activate. This effect can't reduce that cost to 0 or to anything below 1. So no matter what, your activated abilities will cost at least 1 with this card. It does allow for some semi-infinite spawning of Slivers with Sliver Queen. If you have the Haste Sliver out, and then one of the Slivers that allows Slivers to tap for mana, and you have Sliver Queen out, this card can reduce her cost to make Slivers to 1, and then you tap one of your Slivers, it'll produce 1 mana. You activate Sliver Queen, it produces a 1/1 Sliver. That Sliver has haste, it can immediately tap again, make another Sliver, and you can make infinite Slivers this way. So even if you don't have that much mana, you can at least make infinite Slivers. You can do this either at the end of an opponent's turn, or if you have Sliver Legion out, you can make infinite Slivers and proceed to hopefully kill off at least 1 player in that turn. Phyrexian Reclamation, 1 in a black, pay 2 life. Return target creature card from your graveyard to your hand. Helps us retrieve our Slivers again. Slivers do tend to die a lot. Eternal Witness, 1 in a green. When it comes into play, you can return a card from your graveyard to your hand. Mirari's Wake, 3, a green and a white. Creatures you control get +1/+1. Whenever you tap a land for mana, add 1 mana to your mana pool of any type that land produced. This card helps us get more Slivers out. Gives them +1/+1, which doesn't matter too much because a lot of Slivers buff each other anyways. It's mostly just in this build for the mana doubling. Alright, and the card I was mentioning beforehand, Living Death. As I've said before, Slivers tend to get killed a lot. A lot of people that have played Magic for a while or that have made Sliver decks of their own know that when Slivers are in large numbers, they're a problem. So I run this card in the deck. It's a little bit unexpected, but it's 3 and 2 black sorcery. Each player exiles all creature cards from their graveyard, then sacrifices all creatures he or she controls, then puts all cards he or she exiled this way onto the battlefield. In response to this card, you can kill some of your other Slivers, if you have any, but it's also nice after an opponent has Toxic Deluged to immediately get them all back on your following turn. As I said, a lot of people don't expect this in the deck because you have to kill your active Slivers that are out anyways, but it's a nice surprise, and it's just nice in the late game to drop this, bring them all back. Sun Titan, I did keep him in here. He's 4 and 2 white for a 6/6 vigilance. When he comes into play or attacks, return a creature or return a permanent with converted mana cost 3 or less from your graveyard to play. A lot of the very important Slivers like Homing Sliver that allows Slivers to cycle for other Slivers, or Harmonic Sliver that destroys artifacts or enchantments, or slivers that give +1/+1, or the haste sliver. All of those cost 3 or less, so I have kept Sun Titan in so I can get them back. Now we get into the actual slivers. So we have Virulent Sliver. It's 1 green and it's a 1/1. All slivers have Poisonous 1. Now this is actually a fairly old ability before Infect, but whenever a sliver deals combat damage to a player, that player gets a poison counter. If they have 10 or more, they lose the game. So Poisonous is different in effect in that my slivers do regular combat damage. So if they deal damage to a creature, that creature takes combat damage. It does not get minus counters on it. And if it deals damage to a player, they take both combat damage and they get 1 Infect token for each time my slivers can deal damage to them. So if Virulent Sliver swings, it doesn't matter how big it is. If it's a 10/10 and it hits an opponent, they only get 1 poison counter, but they also take 10 damage on top of it. I have them in here so I can finish off people quickly. Just need 10 slivers to hit, and it doesn't matter what their life total is. Do be careful playing this card too early in the game. If opponents see this as your first sliver that you've dropped, they will immediately kill it, or it will cause immediate concern. Generally you want to try to play it later on once you have a few other slivers out. Galerider Sliver. It is 1 blue. Sliver creatures you control have flying, and it's a 1/1. So slivers originally were symmetrical. They would affect all slivers on the board. Once Wizards started putting them in the core sets, they no longer had that. They would only affect your slivers. So some of the slivers in here affect all of them, some only affect mine. This one is better than Winged Sliver because Winged Sliver was 1 in a blue. It affected all slivers, meaning your opponents as well. But it was also still a 1/1. This one is strictly better. Manaweft Sliver, it's 1 in a green for a 1/1. Sliver creatures you control have tap, add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool. We have Gemhide Sliver. It does the same thing as Manaweft, except it gives the ability to all sliver creatures. Having your slivers tap for mana is really nice and get you a bit ahead. Generally this card isn't something that raises too many flags when opponents see it. They just see it comes out as your first sliver, you're getting 1 additional mana at the beginning. Can allow you to very quickly start getting other slivers out, so after this you can drop a haste sliver. That one can immediately start tapping for mana, and you can just start dropping more slivers out. We have Heart Sliver, 1 in a red, 1/1. All slivers have haste. So you can drop him down early, you can drop him down late. The sliver is always good. It allows you to tap for mana right away. If you have a Gemhide or a Manaweft, it allows you to attack right away. I don't run too many slivers, if any, that really have tapped activated abilities. Most of the ones that tap for an ability aren't the best or haven't worked in here. This deck is still an ongoing progress, but so far this is what I've narrowed it down to. There are a few other slivers I've considered adding, and I'll post a small update if I do decide to change them in the future. Sinew Sliver, it's 1 in a white for a 1/1, gives all slivers +1/+1. Slivers are the only creature type that I know of that have creatures that give their type +1/+1 at the common rarity. So slivers actually have 3 of these. This is the first one. The next one is Muscle Sliver. This one only affects your slivers. It's one of the newer ones. You can usually tell if it's a new or old sliver. The newer ones somewhat look like Predator. The old ones, a lot of people compare them to meat hooks. But they do, as their name implies, they look kind of like slivers. So they're a lot more pointy and they have like big talons. Any pictures like that, those are the old slivers, and they will usually say all. with the exception of the Sliver Hive Lord, the indestructible one. He still looks like the old Slivers. We have Muscle Sliver. This is the third one. This gives all Slivers +1/+1. We have Crystalline Sliver. This one is a proxy. I haven't been able to find a real one. They're actually a little bit hard to come by because there is a Legacy Sliver deck that runs these. But it's 1 in a blue, 2/2. Your Slivers have Shroud. They can't be the target of spells or abilities. I don't run that many cards that target my Slivers. I don't think I actually run any cards that target my Slivers. So giving them Shroud is fine. You're never going to need to target them with your own cards. And it makes it so your opponents can't really target them with anything. We have Acidic Sliver. A black and a red for a 2/2. All Slivers have pay 2, sacrifice this creature. This creature deals 2 damage to target creature or player. It gives you a different outlet if for whatever reason your opponent has something like Ghostly Prison, or just something that's preventing you from attacking. If they have one of the cards that says only one creature can attack each turn, you can just sacrifice your creatures to kill them instead. You can kill off problematic creatures that they have. It's also a sack outlet if they're wiping the board. It allows you to do something with them rather than them just dying. We have Darkheart Sliver. Black and a green for a 2/2. All Slivers have sacrificed this creature. You gain 3 life. I run this over Victorial Sliver. That one is white and a green for a 2/2. You can pay 2 mana and sack Slivers to gain 4 life. While the 1 more life isn't really worth paying 2 more mana. So we have the Darkheart. We can play it. We can sack them for free to gain life if we're either about to die. Gives me yet another sack outlet for the deck. And it allows you to offset the high amount of life loss you might be taking for playing very aggressively. We do also run a card. We run a Sliver in here that bounces Slivers to your hand if you pay 2 life. So this can offset the life loss from that too. We have Quick Sliver. It can be played at instant speed. Allows you to play all your Slivers at instant speed. It's 1 in a green for a 1/1. It allows you to, you can flash this in, then flash in other ones as a combat trick. So you can either hold it back, play it early. It has a lot of uses in the deck. And then you can also play your commander at instant speed with it. So you can flash this in, flash in Sliver Overlord, tutor for a couple Slivers. If you have enough mana, then play a few of those. Set up for a win on the following turn in the late game. Diffusion Sliver. It's 1 in a blue for a 1/1. Whenever a Sliver you control becomes a target of a spell or ability an opponent controls, you counter it unless that player pays 2. This is nice in the early game. Keeps opponents from Path to Excellence towards deploying your Slivers early on, as in the first few turns people generally don't have the mana for that. Or at the very least it makes it so they have to pay more. It acts as another semi-Shroud Sliver without actually being Shroud, but it does make it so it's a lot harder to target them. Hibernation Sliver, blue and a black 2/2. All Slivers have pay 2 life, return this creature to its owner's hand. I do have a Harmonic Sliver, so it can give you more triggers of that ability if you don't have that many Slivers out. If for whatever reason someone does try to board wipe, you can bounce them to your hand, paying 2 life for each one you want to save. So it's nice for those purposes. This one I am testing out in the deck still, but I think it'll probably stay in. Firewake Sliver. It's 1 a red and a green for a 1/1. This one also grants all your Slivers haste. It also gives them pay 1, sacrifice this creature to give a target Sliver +2/+2 until end of turn. So if someone plays a Toxic Deluge, you can use it to save a few of them. Or you can use it to just as a haste enabler. If it wasn't for the fact it gave haste, it probably wouldn't be in the deck. But because it gives haste and does something else, That's why I include it. We have Harmonic Sliver, 1 a green and a white for a 1/1. All slivers have, when this creature comes into play, destroy target artifact or enchantment. Something to note, this is not a may trigger. You have to destroy an artifact or enchantment, even if yours is the only target. If there are none, then it's fine, but if you are the only player with artifacts and enchantments out, you have to destroy them. Now I still run it in here, because destroying all of your opponent's artifacts and enchantments, that's always strong. And if you get to the point where you are the only one with artifacts and enchantments out, chances are it probably doesn't matter at this point if you destroy a few. You can use the Phyrexian Reclamation in response to it, and then just let it die. But I mean, we have things like Eternal Witness and Sun Titan to get those cards back anyways, so it's not that big of a deal. We have Necrotic Sliver. It's 1 a white and a black for a 2/2. All slivers have pay 3. Sacrifice this creature to destroy target permanent. With Training Grounds out, it reduces the cost down to 1. So it becomes pay 1 mana, sack a sliver, kill a permanent. With things like Sliver Queen out, you can essentially pay 3 mana to just destroy permanents without losing any of your relevant slivers that are on the board. Sliver Queen is a very important card in this deck, so you do want to try to keep her from dying, or at least make a lot of slivers before she does die. Something that's not currently in here that I do plan on putting in here is Seedborn Muse, which is 3/2 green. It's a 2/4. At the beginning of each opponent's untap phase, you untap all of your permanents. In Slivers, it allows you to activate a lot of abilities, or play things like Quick Sliver, so you can start dropping other slivers. You can activate Sliver Overlord on your opponent's turn. So that card does need to get put in here. It's not in here right now, because quite honestly I did forget to put it in. But it is going to go in the deck soon. That way you can also use things like Necrotic at the end of the turn. Even if you don't have the ability to decrease his ability down to 1, it's still good. You pay 3 and you destroy a permanent. I've used, when this comes out, if an opponent doesn't deal with it within a few turns, you can usually just destroy everything on the board. Homing Sliver, 2 and a red for a 2/2. Each sliver card in each player's hand has sliver cycling 3. So you can pay 3, discard a sliver to search for a sliver. This card on its own has sliver cycling if it's in your hand. So if for whatever reason you need to just discard this one rather than play it, because maybe you don't have enough mana or you need the other sliver really badly, you can just discard it. Or you can play him and then all your slivers can be discarded. It does also enable Living Death if you just want to discard a bunch of them to tutor. We have Bone Scythe Sliver. Your slivers have double strike. It's 3 and a white for a 2/2. Not really much to say about this one. It just helps make your slivers that are big dumb beaters even better. They punch harder. Yeah, just a strong combat enabler. First, double strike's not bad on its own. They'll do damage before your opponent's creatures. Pulmonic Sliver, 3 and 2 white for a 3/3. All slivers have flying, and if this creature will be put into a graveyard, you may put it on top of its owner's library instead. Ward Sliver, 4 and a white. When it comes into play, choose a color. All slivers have protection from that color, meaning they can't be targeted, enchanted, or dealt damage by anything of that color, so you choose something like blue. You can choose white, so they can't Path to Exile or Swords to Plowshare you. It is worth noting that things like Wrath of God will still kill all of your slivers because it doesn't target. We have Megantic Sliver. It's 5 and a green for a 3/3. All slivers you control get +3/+3. There are a few other slivers I need to get for this deck, or that I can't find at the moment. Like Might Sliver, it's 5 mana and gives them +2/+2. It's something I need to add at some point. There are just a few other slivers I do plan on adding, so if there's a really good sliver and you don't see it, you can either ask me why I don't run it. It might be because I don't have it yet, or I might have a reason, but let me know in the comments. And thank you everybody for watching this video. I will have the deck in the description as always, and we'll see you in the next video.